So this is the character that I'm going to be putting a t-shirt on today. He's an orc character who's quite rough and ready, but it's enough to serve our purposes. I'm going to turn off the teeth and armbands and extra details, eyes, all that kind of stuff, medallion. So we start off with a single mesh. If I press Shift F, you can see this is the polygroups on this guy. He just has a single one. If yours is different, if you have different polygroups for whatever reason on your model, then just press Ctrl W with everything visible and it will change it to one polygroup. Every time you press Ctrl W, it will just cycle through a different color. Doesn't really matter what color you have. So from here, I'll press Shift F and we'll start creating our mask. You'll have your standard brush selected by default, so every time you hold down Control, you'll see that standard brush will change to a mask brush, and by default that mask brush is on dots. So dots means that when you paint on your character, it will actually start painting the mask. If you're off your character and you drag on, it will create a square, and every time you drag on, you create more of it. If you drag on no part of your character, you're basically telling it, I want to unmask everything. So we're going to change this to a lasso type just to make it a little bit quicker. We can see that symmetry is on. You see the two dots on either side of this character, whether I'm on my default tool or with Control held down. That's telling me that symmetry is on this character when I look from the front. If it's not, press X and that will toggle that on and off. So I'm just going to drag on top of my character and I'll drag out an area for his sleeve, for example. If I wanted his whole body, I could do it in one go and say, well, down here, up and over for his sleeve. And that, because the symmetry on, will do the other side for me as well. If I want to make to deselect an area, I can just hold down Control, and instead of actually just making a selection like this, I'll hold down Alt as well as Control, and that will actually deselect. If you prefer to paint at this stage, just change back, hold down Control, change back to the dots type, and start painting in your mask. So we'll give him a t-shirt that sits above his ass here, and maybe goes underneath his belly a bit. I'm going to make this a little bit problematic just so we can show how to fix these problems. And we'll make it a more of a rounded neck for this guy. Maybe a little bit higher at the back, something like this. So that'll be the shape of our t-shirt. I'll just fix this area here. And we don't have to be too precise because we have a lot of room for movement afterwards once we've made our mask, or once we've made the t-shirt. So the first thing we want to do is duplicate this guy because we want to make that t-shirt on another object. We could use the extract tool, but I'm going to show you the duplication because it's actually an easier way. So just hit duplicate and I'll press Shift F so we can see our polyframes again, and this time I'll press Ctrl W. Because there's a mask selection, it will make that into a new polygroup. So you only need to press it once. If you pressed it twice, you'll just lose your selection and it will make everything the same polygroup again. I'm going to hide the original character because we're seeing both of them at the same time. So I'll just turn off the eye icon and I'll select our new character. Holding down Control and Shift, you just need to tap on this once. Alright, Control and Shift. It'll be on, this is the default for Control and Shift, so just tap on that polyframe and that will hide everything else except for that one that you tapped. From here you can go down to Geometry, Modify Topology and hit Delete Hidden. We now have a good start point for our t-shirt. This is what it's going to look like, or this is the area, but we have some undercuts and stuff like that that's going to bend around, which are going to prove problematic, so I just want to show you how to get around those. So the first thing you'd normally do is you go to ZRemesher and you'll hit ZRemesh. What ZRemesh will do is it will look at the target polygon count, which normally defaults to 5, and we'll try and actually change our Dynamesh topology into quads. And as you can see there, it's done a fairly decent job, but it's got some weird stuff acting down here under the undercut, and it's acting weirdly because a lot of this stuff over here was weird before we did our ZRemesh. If I undo this, you can see we have a very jaggy surface here. It's very jaggy. So one of the things we can do to fix that is we can go to Edge Loop and we can just say Group Loops. What Group Loops will do is it will smooth all of those jagginess out. So that's smoothed it out for us, which is great. But what it has done is it's added in new polygroups in there for us. So we want to get rid of those. So I'm just going to hold Control and Shift, tap on the main one. That's going to hide everything else, and we do the same thing we did before. We go to Modify Topology and we say Delete Hidden. Now when we go back to ZRemesher, and we'll bring our target polygon count down to say 5 and hit ZRemesh. You can see we get a much cleaner result, and it's working a lot better for us. It's still a little bit high and it's not very t-shirt-esque yet, so I'm going to take the smooth brush by just holding down Shift, and I'm just going to smooth out some of these areas that you wouldn't expect to see on a t-shirt with all this detail. I'm going to smooth that out a little bit, and at the back as well, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be crazy. I'll press Shift F so we can see what we're actually doing here. You can see if I now go back and I turn on the subtool for the original character underneath this, our t-shirt fits, but if we go to inflate, we can just inflate that a little bit. So just enough that we actually see it through the character. So now we can actually see what we're doing here a little bit. So I'm going to change to my move tool, BMV. I'm just going to move some of this out. Symmetry is still on, so we can kind of just push this t-shirt out a little bit to hide these details. Check at the back, and this is why I was saying we don't need to be so accurate earlier on. We can move this stuff around. There's still quite a lot of polygons here, so I'm actually going to reduce this even more. If we go back to our geometry and ZRemesh, less is more here, so I'm just going to hit half, and I'm going to hit ZRemesh again, and you'll see our polygon count's changed from what was 10,000. Half of that is about 5,000, so that's a lot lighter again. And I'll keep half turned on, and I'll hit it one more time, and we're getting down to 2,000, and maybe even one more time. So the lower we go, the better as far as I'm concerned on this. Like, so down to 1,500, this is a lot better. Now we can take this, and you can see how quick and easy it is to move this stuff around, really, and it's just gentle nudging of stuff into place. But if we want to smooth out areas, it's much easier to pick 1 or 2 points and get them smooth than if we had a lot of points. If we want this to pull out, like the way a t-shirt would naturally fall, I can do that, and then I can smooth here. So I'd expect that to, gravity would take over here. We pull this out. I'm pressing Shift to just smooth that out a little bit. And we're going to let the computer do the work of fixing this afterwards. So maybe we'll even pull this up. We have a lot of control now because we have so few points on this that we can move stuff around. So once we have that, if you're not happy with your ZRemesh, just turn off half and do it again, and you'll get a slightly different result every time. Like, so every time you hit this, you may get something closer to what you're happy with. Like, so just when you see something that looks half decent, kind of stick with it. I think that's fine for me for our purposes. So I'm going to turn this off, and let's start making this looking into more of a t-shirt. So I'm just going to fix up a couple of small areas before we continue further with this. I'm going to select my move brush, and I'm going to go up here where I can see that there's a little bit of an indent in his chest, at his neck here. So I'm just going to fix that up a little bit. Straighten that up there. It's nice and easy to do with so few points on the model, which was the reason we did this in the first place. I can pull some of this stuff down and even out some of this topology. We can even hold down Shift, but we're going to start deforming the shape an awful lot, so we don't need to worry about that too much. We can always clean that up later on. These shapes from the side I am going to clean up just to get that curve a little bit more nicer. Maybe push that out. And the next thing to check is that if we want a seam along his sleeve here, we would have to check to see whether that's possible. So if I change back to my standard Z modeler tool, BZM, or for in my case Alt Q, and I try and insert an edge loop, if this happens, then I know that I've got a spiral going through my model here. So that means that I need to go back to my ZRemesh, and I'm going to choose same here because I like the poly count here, but I'm just not happy with the spirals. And I'll try ZRemesh again and see if we get a better result. So you can see now if I put this in, this is actually working for me. So you may need to hit this a couple of times in order to get the result that you're looking for. The loops may not necessarily be in the perfect place, but That's fine, it'll be enough for our purposes here. We can always fix this later on. So now we're going to create some seams, but before we do that we need to give some depth to this. So you'll see if I go into edge loop and go down to panel loops, you'll see that it by default is set up for 5 loops. I think the thickness is something like this by default, and a polish with a bevel. So we're going to be removing most of those, but just to show you why, if we hit panel loops now straight off the bat, you'll see that all of this stuff got smoothed out, but smoothed out a little bit too much. We've lost some of the forms that made this guy him. So I'm going to turn off the polish and do it again, and you'll see that we keep the form there, but we just get the depth, but the depth is not very thick. So I'm going to undo that again, and I'm going to increase the depth, and this will depend on the scale of your model, like, so it's up to you to find a depth that you're happy with. I'm going to say okay to that. I'll just undo it again, actually just to show you why. We do have a bevel on this now, so you'll see that this bevel profile that we have here, this is the start, this is, say, the red polygons here. It goes up, across, and down again to the purple. So it goes up, across, and down again to the purple. If we had put a point in here and we had said panel loops, we'd get that going up, down, basically matching this shape. So we don't want to do that. I'm going to turn off the beveling altogether. If I do that, we'll get a flat surface, but we'll also get 5 loops, and I don't really want 5 loops, so I'm going to turn that off as well and just hit panel loops. So for you, you'll basically be turning off H polish, remove the bevel, reduce the loops, and increase the thickness, and that's it. And then you'll get to here. So with this now, I can turn on dynamic subdivision or press D to see what this looks like, and we have the startings of a t-shirt here. So now we're going to create a seam for the sleeve. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to hover over an edge, and I'm going to change from insert edge loop to bevel, and that's a single edge loop. If I make a very small change, there's a chance the ZBrush will just kind of pop it out to be larger than I want it to be. So if that happens to you, if ZBrush is actually making it a different size, just click and drag and push out, and then while you're dragging down, push it back in again, and that will tell it that you're making the decision here, not ZBrush, as it were. That's actually the wrong place I wanted to create this bevel, so I'm going to do it up here instead. You can see if I do it with dynamic subdivision turned on, it can be hard to see what's actually going on here. So I'm going to turn dynamic subdivision off with Shift D, and then I'm going to click on this and then drag it out and then drag it back in again. So that's created the bevel for this sleeve here. So with that created, you'll notice that if I hover over any given edge, that we have this orange line here. This orange line is to indicate which direction a loop will go in. So if we're hovering over a polygon and we change from Q mesh to poly loop, that will now take whichever direction we're going in. So if I'm going this way, it's going to go up and down, take a loop all the way along there. If I'm going this direction, it's going to go this direction. So I'm going to take this stuff here and I'm going to poly loop it down. I'm just going to Q mesh it down a little bit. And now when I turn on dynamic subdivision, I'll say, oh, yes, that we have this sleeve, we have this seam in our sleeve here. Now it's not perfect, we need to work on a little bit, but it's the start. So we have that here, and we also need to start creating some cuffs for this. So for this, I'm going to hover over an edge again. I'm going to change it back to insert a single edge loop. I'm going to click about 2/3 of the way up here, and then I'm going to choose this Q mesh poly loop with the orange line pointed in the right direction here. Now when I press D, you'll see we have a little cuff here. So we go up and we do the same thing at the top. I'm going to create a new edge loop about 3/4 of the way up. I'm going to zoom in, and this time I don't even have to click and drag. I can just tap, and ZBrush will give me the same distance for this as it did for this down here. So it'll extrude by the same amount. So when we press D, these two will be the same size. For the bottom of the t-shirt, we have a different issue here, that the polygons here are quite small, where these are quite long. So if we were to insert a new edge loop here, all we'd be doing is maintaining that ratio of difference between these two. So I want to create an even lip along here. So to do that, I'm actually just going to create a new lip. So if I'm going to poly loop it again, and now you'll see that when I do this, I can actually choose, these will all be exactly evenly spaced, which means that we can now insert a new edge loop close to this on the other side rather. So this is going to be evenly spaced out, and we can take this edge loop, change to scale, edge loop complete. We can just kind of push that one in a little bit. So now when I press Shift D, we get this slight little lip at the bottom of his t-shirt. So it's not perfect. We do need to go in and clean some of this up. I can change back to a move tool. Because we have so few points to actually modify, we can just kind of move these and straighten this up a little bit. This is looking better. I'm going to push all of this stuff in. And it's time to actually see this on the character, so I'm going to turn the character back on. We may have some small pinching issues down here, but if we go into solo mode, we can have a look and see what was happening there. And it's just that the inside of this was actually causing a problem. So I'm just going to press Shift and smooth some of that out on the inside here. And what actually happened there was when the polygroup was created, the polygroup actually snapped to some other verts there. So what we're going to do there is I'm going to undo some of the latest changes that we made, because I didn't spot that earlier on. And it is only a couple of seconds to actually make these changes anyway, so I'm going to smooth this before the fact. We go back, we'll change back to our Z modeler tool, and we bevel this edge like this. We use our Q mesh to push it in, and you'll see that that problem has pretty much disappeared. So that's our seam, and we can go back in here and hover over an edge, change back to insert, to this, poly loop it out, come back in here about 2/3 of the way, and I'll just tap that. Now if I've moved at all, it's going to ask me to, it's going to do it again basically, so I'm going to have to get that to be the right size myself by eye. And then we added a new poly loop to the bottom here, so I can just take that, drag that out a little bit. We inserted a new edge loop, and then we took this one and we scaled it in a little bit. Press D to see what that looks like, and we just use our move tool and just kind of fix up some of this stuff here. I might as well turn on the character as well by going out of solo mode to see what this looks like. And we can adjust his t-shirt now to fit. So we're going to be making some pretty major changes to his t-shirt later on anyway, with folds and all that kind of stuff, but now would also be a good time to consider unwrapping this. So at the moment we don't have two halves, this is kind of one piece, so you'd split this down the middle here, and there'd be a seam coming down the side here. So I'm going to go back into solo mode, press Shift F to see what we're working with. So now we're going to create a seam along the shoulder and underneath the arm here. So we'll pick a suitable place. I think this loop is a good one here, and as we hover over that, we'll hover over an edge rather, and we change to extrude, and we choose edge loop complete or edge loop partial, it doesn't really matter. So the way this works is that whatever edge you're hovering over, when you approach, or whatever polygon you're hovering over rather, when you approach an edge and you click, it's going to lift a new edge up from that polygon. So if I had approached it from this side and I click on this edge, it's going to bring it up from that side. So depending which way I want the seam on my guy, and I think they normally go forwards on t-shirts, I haven't checked, so this is on me, not checking my reference, but I'm going to go from this side and I'm going to go forward here, and I'm going to lift that up a little bit. So that's going to create a seam here, but the seam has gone down the sleeve, and that's not necessarily what I want, and it hasn't gone down the side of the body here. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go from this side, and then I'm just going to tap on this. That's going to give me the same depth as I had at the top. So we're coming from the same side on both of these, but I need to lose this stuff on the arm here, and I need to put it at the bottom of the arm. So I'm going to go from this side and I'm going to tap on this, and I got that wrong. It's from this side, and you're going to, sorry, I didn't get that wrong. It's from here. I tap there. So that should be that's where the sleeve will be, or the seam will be underneath the sleeve, and I need to lose this bit over here. So to lose this, I'm going to go press Shift D to go back into normal polygroup mode, and I'm just going to use stitching. So I'm going to hover over a vertex, I'm going to make sure stitching is turned on, 2 points, and I'm going to say to end point. So using the stitch, so from here I'm going to stitch these back to from whence they came. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose that point, and I'm going to stitch it to this point. I'm going to choose here, this one, and stitch it back here, and run down the top of this sleeve here, stitching these back into place all the way down the sleeve. Now if you wanted this to stay here, obviously you wouldn't do this. It depends on what kinds of clothes you're making, and you can choose to do the inside or not. I'm just going to choose one because we won't really see this. So I'll press Shift D, and then that's our seam there, but there's not really enough depth to this seam. It's a little bit fuzzy. So we can zoom back in here as well, and hovering over an edge, this time we'll go back to insert a single edge loop, and I'll click here to add an insert an edge loop rather. I'll press D to see what that looks like, and it's kind of tightened that up nicely. I don't think this should go around the collar. I think that should be a separate piece, so I'm going to stitch this bit up here as well. So rather than actually stitch now where I've added in all these extra points, I'm going to undo the addition of that one, and now I'm going to stitch before I actually add in that new edge loop. So stitch here, and take your time doing this. Again, how much you do of the inside is up to you. We're not going to see it. So this is what this is going to look like. So I now need to add in that extra loop. Press Shift D to see this again. Insert the edge loop here, and that will tighten that up nicely. So we can do the same down at the bottom here. I'm going to leave this coming over the edge of the bottom, so I'm just literally just going to insert a new edge loop here to tighten that up, and I'll do the same on the sleeve here. So I'll press Shift D to get out of there. I'll tighten that one up, and I think I'm okay with that coming around at the bottom of the sleeve there. So that's the bones of our t-shirt. If you did decide to smooth out some areas here, you can just go in with a smooth brush and tap that out, or you can just manually start moving some of these verts around. If you hover over vert, you can just change to move mode and just kind of if you hover over vert with move mode on by brush radius, we can just kind of start moving this stuff out. I'm kind of okay with it as is. So it's time to start unwrapping this before we start adding folds to it. So you can see that we have poly groups on the front and back that are separated now by a new poly group. So if we go up to our Z plugin and unwrap, if we take off poly groups and we say unwrap, the unwrap that we're going to get, sorry, I'll have to turn off dynamic subdivision. The unwrap that we're going to get with this is at different angles, and kind of we're not going to get consistent textures running across this. So but instead, if we go to plugin and we turn on poly groups, because we have poly groups here, they're kind of split up by these seams. When we hit unwrap here, now when we morph this to see what this looks like, you'll see that this is a much better unwrap. We see from the front all this stuff that's going to tile nicely any materials that we put across here. So, and the seams I'm not too bothered about. So from here we can start adding in textures and also folds. I'm going to unhide this, and we see our guy again, see what this looks like. This is fine, but let's make some asymmetry in this guy. So I'm just going to press X to turn off symmetry. I'll change to a move brush. I'm just going to move some of this stuff around, and we can change this quite a lot later on. Just going to make this a little bit more interesting. We're going to have folds on this later on, which we can kind of imply when it's shorter on one side than it is the other. We can kind of imply that that was because of the folds that we put in. So we bunch up some material in some places and not in others. So basically now we're just trying to make it look a little bit more natural, a little bit more kind of just happens to be sitting on him. And these folds, as I said, will actually change how it actually sits on him. So it's nice and easy to modify right now when we have so few polygons on this, which is the reason that we're doing all this in the first place. Okay, cool. I've modified some stuff here. Let's bring that back out again. That's okay there. So small nudges here will actually help change these shapes. We don't need to make dramatic changes. So we're now ready to start creating some folds on this t-shirt. So we can do this using a multi-alpha brush. I've created one for you, which you'll find in the description links below. It's available for free. So once you download that, just put it somewhere, press B, load brush, browse to the folder where you put it, and load SF cloth folds. Open that, and you'll see that you have a brush with about 40 different folds on them. So any given one of these, when we click and drag on our model, is going to put that fold onto our model. But you'll see that right now, I'll just undo that, and I also pressed Shift D. But you'll see when I do that, that we don't have enough polygons to actually get enough detail from this, because this is how many polygons we actually have. We have 4,000 here. Like, so what we need to do when we turn on dynamic, all we're seeing is a preview of what this would look like. It's not actually giving us the polygons to deform this surface enough. So what we need to do now is convert this into real subdivisions. So we can do that by just hitting apply, and that will convert those 4,000 into 64,000, and we can even divide that one more time to quadruple that number to 250,000. I'm going to press Shift D, I'm going to press Shift F to turn off the display, and you'll see that now our folds appear on this a lot better than before. So these icons can be very difficult to see. I'll do a separate tutorial on how these are created, but if you press M, you probably get a clearer description of what these look like. So this is the point now where we choose which folds we're going to put on and where they're going to appear on this guy. So we can just drag them out. Changing the intensity here will change how strong this is when we put it onto the character. So we can just press M when we want to choose another one. I'll take any of these, and I've reduced the intensity. I'm going to bring that back up again, and I'm actually going to choose a different brush. So these will kind of generally line up with each other a little bit. We can use this to create some folds where we think that they make sense. And as well as adding folds in like this, generally you'll put them where you have pressure points. I'm going to reduce the intensity of this one a little bit. We could have them like that, or if we hold down Alt, they'll actually cut in to the mesh, so that'll give us the opposite effect. So outward looks like that, and it looks like we may need another subdivision. So I'm going to divide this one more time, and this would be without Alt, this would be with Alt. So you can get two different looks from these brushes depending on whether you're holding down Alt or not. Like I said, press M as in mother to change to the different fold types, and as you click and drag, you can just spin them around into the direction that makes sense for you or that you need. Generally, the fewer you use, the more kind of convincing they can be. You know, if you're going to go crazy on this, you can very quickly look like you're just making it up, kind of thing. Like, so we're just going to put these where they make sense to me. I think we said we're going to do a lot of bunching over on this side, which would explain why the t-shirt is higher up on this side. So this kind of thing makes sense to me, and maybe we'll even do a couple of crosses back, something like that. I'm not going to go crazy on this. Like I said, if you hold down Alt, you'll get tension. So if you choose something like maybe this one, and we can imply, actually maybe up here. So this is about looking at your reference and saying, well, what makes sense? Where would these tension lines go on a model? And it depends on the structure of your model, and it depends on his belly, and depends on a lot of things. Like, so it's kind of up to you to find the areas that work. But that's pretty much it. So If you wanted to reduce the strength of any of these, you can just go down in your subdivisions, press Shift D a couple of times, just smooth that out. So when you go back up, it won't be as prominent as it was before. That's pretty much it, and I think we're now ready to start putting some surfaces onto this guy. So now that we have this, we're ready to start putting some texture onto this guy. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift and tap on our main surface here. Control Shift tap again, and I'm going to take this strip along his shoulders as well. Now that I've hidden that, I can press Control A to select everything else, to basically mask everything else. Control Shift tap on the canvas to bring everything back, and we can see this is what we're masking. So I'm going to press Shift F so we can see a little bit clearer, and I'm going to hold down Control and just paint in this area here. That was where that strip was coming down. And at the collar, and because he was asymmetrical, I didn't use symmetry this time, so we'll have to do that on the other side as well. Don't have to be too fussy with this because like I said, we're going to blur it soon. Might reduce some of that. And now I'm just going to control and tap on this to just reduce the blur, or to blur it more, so which will reduce the effect of the mask. And we're going to have this texture on the surface that remains here. So if we go over to surface now and we hit noise, you can see that this noise is now being affected everywhere where there is not a mask. So that's the part that we've kept unmasked. There is a noise to this that ZBrush puts in automatically. If we bring that noise, or the noise right back down, right down to nothing, or mix by noise if there is any, just turn that off. Turn on alpha, and whether this is a leather or a t-shirt or a jacket or whatever it is that you're working on, just choose a fabric that seems to work for you. So I'm going to take one that I have not yet tried, and I'm going to mix the basic noise. I'm going to turn that off, and you can see this basic noise it puts in, even though the noise scale is at 0, the noise is still there. So you need to turn this down just to get a clean look at this. So while this is working, it's stretching across the surface here, and that's because we're using 3D space to apply this rather than the UVs. So we just need to turn on UVs, and now that stretching will disappear. Now we need to change the scale of our alpha. We can increase the strength of this as well, so we can see what's going on, and we can reduce the scale of this till we get to the scale that we want. Something like this is fine. I might make this a tiny bit stronger and hit OK. So this is what this looks like now. If I hit Control H, we'll be hiding the mask. It's still there. We're just hiding it for the moment. That's all. So this is something that I'm reasonably happy with. We can keep that. So now I'll press Control H to bring back a mask, and I can say mask by noise. But you notice that we have 1 million polygons here. So when I hit mask by noise, this may be a little bit blurrier than you'd like. If it's working, if you go down to deformation and you inflate this a little bit and you're kind of happy with the result, then you can just Control drag to get rid of your mask and say, okay, well, that's good enough for me. This looks more like a jumper now than a t-shirt. But so if that's not good enough, just get rid of your mask, go back up to geometry, hit divide one more time to bring it up to maybe 4 million polygons, for example. And this time we'll do the same thing. We'll hold Control Shift, tap it again, tap any other parts that you need, Control A to select all that, or to mask all that, Control Shift, tap to bring it back, Control paint in masks wherever you need to, or Control Alt to reduce masks wherever you need to. I didn't have symmetry on, so I'm going to go over to the other side as well. And then we just Control tap the mask a few times just to blur that and to reduce its effect. We'll go back to our surface down here, go to noise, and you'll see that it will remember the noise that we previously had. So now when we hit mask by noise, because we have 4 million polygons, we're going to get a little bit more detail here. So when we go to our deformation and we inflate, You only need to inflate by a tiny bit, and we'll remove our mask. Hopefully we have slightly more detail than we had the last time. So that's it. Now if you want to go up to your cuff and start, maybe we can mask this area again. Control A to mask this. Control Shift Tap to bring everything back. Control Alt to unmask this area. Unmask this, and here. Start to look like a basketball jersey when you zoom out very quickly there. Just expecting a big number 66 or something written here, but right. So, and then from that we can go back up to our surface noise, and we can choose a different map. So if we go to edit, all we have to do to change the alpha is we click on the alpha on off. That will remove it. Click on it again. That will allow us to choose a different alpha. So if you have a different alpha, I haven't prepared one here, but if you have a different alpha and you want to see what that looks like, you can just do that. I'm going to edit here. I'm going to change some settings here. This is far too strong, so I'm going to bring that strength right down for this particular texture. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to hit OK, and I should have blurred that mask. So if I had blurred that mask a little bit more, we go back, edit this, just say OK, and we mask by noise. So it's just going to add this mask onto our existing mask. So when we go to our deformation and choose to inflate or deflate or whatever it is, it's going to do that along those seams. And actually, truth be told, if I hit Control H here, I'd actually rather not affect those seams here. So I'm just going to actually mask these two. So just hold down Control and just actually paint out these masks here. So this doesn't get affected. And if it's not quite enough of a mask, we can grow the mask. So we can go down to masking and we can hit grow. That will just grow it a little bit. Maybe I've done that a little bit too much, but from here now we can go back to our deformation and we can say we want to inflate that or deflate that, depending on which direction you want to push this texture. So find a better texture. And if you had done your unwrap in Maya or something like that, you could probably get a ribbed texture that will actually follow along in the right direction. But that's pretty much it. How to create a t-shirt in half an hour kind of thing. Alright, cheers. I hope it helps, and as usual, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I'll upload that brush. As I said, it's in the description, the folds brush, and if you have any questions, please do let me know. Cheers, bye.